He was Friedrich Haass, a renowned physician and graduate of Europe's finest universities. He arrived in Russia at the beginning of the 19th century, intending to build a career. But what he saw was different. He saw inhumane suffering, he saw utter powerlessness, and he did not turn away. Haass dedicated his life to the most outcast, prisoners, vagrants, and the destitute. He treated them and advocated for their humane treatment. He fought for the abolition of shackles, for the creation of prison hospitals, and for the dignity of every inmate. He became a symbol of mercy for thousands of disadvantaged people. But for officials, for the guardians of old orders, Haass transformed into a dangerous adversary. He was an outsider who dared to challenge their world, built on indifference and cruelty. He paid a high price for this. His name was almost forgotten for a century. Yet it was he, one of the first in Russia, who spoke of human rights. He didn't just heal bodies, he healed souls. This story is not just about medicine, it is about a struggle. About a man who defied established rules and laid the foundations for a completely new approach to justice. Great discoveries are not always born in the quiet of laboratories. They are not always met with jubilation. Often they emerge at the epicenter of fierce resistance. They are created by those who see the world differently. And so their ideas are often rejected. Attempts are made to erase them from memory. But their light does not fade. It awaits its hour, sometimes for centuries. The early 19th century was an era when human life was cheap and suffering was merely background noise. Medicine had barely emerged from the Middle Ages. Centuries-old dogmas dictated every step. Prejudice, not experience, was the law. Death was a common companion, even for the simplest ailments. Barbaric methods were considered normal. Surgical instruments were rare, and infections were inevitable. Pus-filled wounds were deemed praiseworthy, a sign that the illness was leaving. Open fractures were cauterized with red-hot iron or doused with boiling oil to burn out the infection. Patients writhed in agony, dying from shock or gangrene. Hospitals were breeding grounds for contagion, places where suffering only deepened. People died in filth, without hope of healing and without a drop of compassion. It was a world where human life meant nothing, and compassion was considered weakness. It was into such a world that the man who dared to challenge it had to step. This man was Friedrich Haass. A German native, a graduate of Europe's best universities, he brought with him not only profound knowledge, but also progressive ideas shaped in the centers of European medicine. In 1808, at the age of 27, he arrived in Moscow. A brilliant career awaited him. He became one of the city's leading doctors, the personal physician to Prince Repnin's family. He was valued for his deep knowledge and brilliant practice. But this comfortable life could not hide another reality from him, a reality hidden behind the walls of hospitals for the poor. He began to see patients at the police hospital, and what he witnessed there shocked him to the core. It wasn't just filth or pain, it was complete indifference. Doctors here didn't treat, they waited for death. Nurses didn't care, they turned away. He saw people who could have been helped waste away day by day. He saw the simplest wounds festering into gangrene and fever claiming lives that could have been saved. He had been taught to heal. He had been taught to save. But here, within these walls, medicine was merely a ritual, soulless, meaningless. He could not understand how his colleagues could calmly watch this, how they could accept it as normal. For him, a man accustomed to a scientific approach and a sense of responsibility for every life, it was unacceptable. It made him question, not his knowledge, but the very foundation of their world, what they called medicine, what they called justice. To question was only the first step. Haass could not simply observe. He had to act. His knowledge, his principles, his belief in the value of every life demanded it. One day, in one of the dirtiest wards of the police hospital, a young soldier was brought to him. His leg was mangled, an open fracture, bone protruding, and the wound festering. The pain was unbearable. According to the old rules, such a wound should have been cauterized with a red-hot iron or doused with boiling oil. This was the only protection against gangrene, which almost always followed such injuries. Instruments were prepared. Tongs were heated. But when it was time for the oil, it turned out there was none. Supplies had run out. The doctors and nurses froze, waiting. They knew only the red-hot metal remained. The soldier trembled, anticipating the unbearable torture. But Haass looked at the wound differently. He didn't just see an infection to be burned out. He saw living tissue. He saw a man who was already in too much pain. He remembered what he had learned in the best European clinics, something considered madness here. He ordered a basin of clean, warm water to be brought, not boiling, just clean, and fresh, sterile linen bandages. The nurses exchanged glances. No one understood, but Haass was unyielding. His hands, accustomed to the most delicate operations, carefully cleaned the wound. He washed away the pus and dirt. He gently reset the bone. Then he applied a simple, clean dressing. There was no scream, no smell of burning, only a quiet moan of relief. The soldier was given opium to sleep. The nurses waited, expecting inevitable death, expecting gangrene. But the next morning, and the day after, and a week later, something incredible happened. The soldier's temperature did not skyrocket. The wound did not blacken. It began to heal, slowly, painfully. But it healed. The pus diminished. The edges of the wound drew together. The soldier survived. And not just survived, his leg, though disfigured, retained its mobility. This was not just an experiment, it was a challenge to the centuries-old tradition that held Russian medicine captive. A challenge to indifference, a challenge to barbarism. For the first time within these walls, a human life was saved not to spite, but because of compassion and science. Haass showed that there was another way, a way where pain was not punishment and cleanliness was not a luxury. This was the beginning of a new era in treatment and the beginning of a new understanding of human value. The soldier survived, and it was not a miracle. It was proof. Proof that centuries-old dogmas based on fear and ignorance were lies, that truth lay in observation, in experience. In science, Haass didn't just heal, he studied. Every case became a lesson for him, every ward a living laboratory. He recorded everything, from body temperature to the slightest changes in a wound. He saw how wounds healed when they weren't burned with fire, but carefully cleaned. He saw how patients recovered when given clean water instead of dirty concoctions. His cognitive tool was empiricism. He believed not in authority, but in results. This approach was revolutionary. It meant a complete rejection of medical traditions that were nothing more than death rituals. Haass systematized his observations. He turned successful cases into protocols and failures into new questions demanding answers. But how to convey this knowledge to a world that didn't want to hear it? Haass chose a path available to few. He began to publish his works. He wrote in German, the language of European science, the language in which the continent's most progressive minds communicated. His articles spread through scientific journals. They described methods that saved lives, proving the effectiveness of cleanliness and gentle care. Thus, his experience extended beyond a single Moscow hospital, reaching colleagues ready for change. He did not limit himself to theory. Haass constantly sought new solutions. He invented. He developed new types of bandages, light, breathable, non-damaging to the skin. He insisted on strict disinfection of instruments. He demanded sterilization of linen. He worked to ensure that wards had enough light and fresh air. These simple, yet radical for that time, measures were his real tools in the fight for life. They were the embodiment of his principles. He learned at every step. Failure did not break him, but compelled him to seek new approaches. He was not afraid to admit that yesterday's knowledge could be wrong. His goal was one, to find a way to alleviate suffering and to save a human being. Haass didn't just treat. He created a new logic for medicine, a logic based on observation, evidence, and continuous improvement. He laid the foundation for a future where every human life mattered, where pain was a signal for action, not a death sentence, where compassion and science went hand in hand. This was his contribution, not only to medicine, but to a new understanding of humanity. The salvation of the soldier with the mangled leg, the recovery of dozens of others. Haass meticulously recorded these facts. He published his observations. But his colleagues were not quick to applaud. On the contrary, Haass's results were undeniable, but they provoked not admiration, but anger. The old doctors, the professors whose methods he challenged, saw him as an enemy. They called him a charlatan, accused him of heresy, of violating centuries-old traditions. Their main argument, Haass refused cauterization. Refused boiling oil, he trusted water, not fire. This was madness in their eyes. It was a direct challenge to their authority. The medical community, accustomed to rituals rather than real results, could not accept him. They feared what he represented, a new, unpredictable force. Doctors, many of whom held academic titles, wrote denunciations. They demanded that he be forbidden from practicing. They claimed his methods were dangerous, that they led to infection, to inevitable death. Rumors multiplied. They called him an outsider, an interloper who brought harmful European innovations to Russia. They accused him of ignorance, of endangering patients' lives, of jeopardizing the very foundation of Russian medicine. Doctors openly ignored his instructions, refused to follow his protocols. Nurses sabotaged his orders. They waited for him to make a mistake, for his patients to die, to prove him wrong. But Haass's patients survived. And this was the most terrifying thing for his opponents. They could not ignore this fact, but to accept it meant admitting their own incompetence, admitting that their entire lives, their teachings, their practice were built on delusion. However, Haass was not alone. His results spoke for themselves, and these results were seen by those who held real power. Prince Repnin, whose personal physician Haass was, became his chief defender. Repnin saw how those whom other doctors had written off were recovering. He saw how the statistics at the police hospital were changing. Mortality rates were decreasing, and this was undeniable. Other influential figures joined him, those who valued real benefit, not dogma. They gave Haass the opportunity to work. They ignored complaints. They protected him from attacks. This was not just a matter of medical methods. It was a struggle for influence, for control over minds, for the future of medicine in Russia. A struggle between progress and stagnation, between knowledge and prejudice. And Haass, this outsider, found himself at the epicenter of this clash. He challenged a world that did not want to change, and that world responded with fury. This fury demanded an outlet. Haass's opponents could not accept his successes. They filed official complaints with the Medical Collegium, the country's highest medical body. They demanded not just to prohibit his practice, they insisted on a full investigation of his methods, accused him of dangerous experiments, of undermining foundations, of ignorance. The Collegium could not ignore such accusations. A special commission was appointed. It included the most authoritative professors. Many of them were open opponents of Haass. This was not just an interrogation, it was a trial of a new path, of the future of Russian medicine. Haass appeared at the meeting. He did not come alone. With him were his patients, those who had been written off, those who should have died, but who survived. He presented his records. Dozens of case histories, detailed observations, results that spoke for themselves. He showed how cleanliness saves, how gentle care brings people back to life. His opponents tried to refute him. They cited centuries-old authorities, ancient treatises, established rules. But before living testimonies, before undeniable facts, their arguments proved powerless. The commission made its decision. It was unanimous. Dr. Haass's methods were recognized not merely as safe, they were declared exemplary. The Collegium's decision changed the balance of power. It was official recognition, not just an acquittal. It was a victory of new knowledge over old myth. Haass was fully rehabilitated, but this was just the beginning. The Medical Collegium not only approved his methods, it recommended their widespread implementation. His protocols became mandatory for all hospitals. He received the right of supervision, the right to demand changes. From an outsider, from an outcast, he became an undeniable authority. His name became a symbol of a new era, an era where medicine relied on science, on evidence, on compassion. This was not just the triumph of one doctor. It was a turning point in the approach to human life. For the first time in Russia, the voice of reason and mercy sounded so loudly, and it was heard at the highest level. His ideas, rejected yesterday, became law today. And this was just the first step on the path to what would later be called human rights. The Medical Collegium's decision took effect immediately. From that moment, every hospital and infirmary in Russia was obliged to follow Haass's protocols. This meant a complete abandonment of ancient barbaric methods. Cauterization with red-hot iron and boiling oil was forbidden. In their place came new rules: thorough cleaning of wounds with warm water, the use of clean, sterile dressings, and regular linen changes. Haass received unprecedented authority. He became the chief inspector of medical institutions, his task to personally oversee the implementation of the new standards. He traveled to hospitals, inspected wards, and trained doctors and nurses. He explained the principles of instrument disinfection. He demanded sufficient light and fresh air in the rooms. These measures, once considered madness, now became the norm. The results were immediate. Documents from that time, reports from the Medical Collegium, showed dramatic changes. In the police hospital where Haass began his work, mortality among trauma patients decreased by more than half in the first year of implementing the new methods. The success rate for healing purulent wounds increased from less than 10% to almost 60%. Survival after complex fractures, previously almost zero, now reached 40%. These figures were irrefutable. They spoke for themselves. In other hospitals, where people once died from the simplest infections, lives were now saved. Even those previously considered hopeless began to recover. Medical institutions, once breeding grounds for contagion, gradually transformed into places of real healing. Haass's new rules did not just change the approach to treatment, they changed the very attitude towards the sick person. Cleanliness became not a luxury, but a necessity. Compassion, not a weakness, but the foundation of medical practice. This was not just a set of new techniques, it was a shift in consciousness. Haass proved human life, even that of the most outcast, has value, and it must be fought for, with science in hand, with mercy in heart. He didn't just heal bodies, he healed the very understanding of medicine. He forced the system to work for life, not for death. His victory in medicine was undeniable, but the true significance of his struggle extended far beyond the walls of hospitals. Haass didn't just achieve cleanliness in wards. He didn't just save lives. He spoke about the value of every human being, about their right to compassion, to dignified treatment, to a chance to survive. This was not just healing, it was the proclamation of a new philosophy, a philosophy where human life, regardless of status, acquired the highest value. He laid the foundation for what centuries later would be called human rights. And therein lies the paradox of his legacy. His name was almost erased from memory, but the ideas he fought for became the cornerstone of a new world, a world where even pain and suffering could not rob a person of their dignity. His story is a reminder. Great changes often begin with one person, with someone who dared to see the world differently and did not turn away from pain.